landscape fabric is ugly and harmful. In this video, we'll investigate why, and I'll also give you some alternatives that make a bit more sense. Look, we all hate weeds and want to get rid of them. So last year I decided to put a lot of weed mat down on this section of my garden. It doesn't really look like it's worked, does it? So why not? Well, here's your first issue. See mulch, leaves, sticks, and dirt all accumulate on top of the weed mat. When the stuff breaks down, it creates the perfect environment for these weeds to grow. See, it doesn't take much for a weed to grow. That's kind of why it's a weed and a problem. Anyway, you might think this weed is growing in a gap between the weed matting, but it's growing directly on top. This massive weed, how can it sustain itself? Well, I'll show you. Let's take a little look-see under this landscape fabric. Why is it so hard to pull up? Could it be that the weed's roots are growing through the landscape fabric? Well, I'll rip one off. Let's investigate. Surely it can't be true. These are marketed to stop weeds, not sustain them. And here it is. The weed on top, the roots growing through. This is why when you try and pull out a weed from on top of landscape fabric, sometimes it can be super tough. It's not growing in loose soil. It's anchored down to the weed mat. They shouldn't call it weed mat, they should call it weed anchor. It's also really ugly. No matter what you do, how much mulch you put on top, it'll still show its face, crawl its way out. Looks like a giant rubbish dump on the side of a hill. Also, if weed seeds do manage to land on the mat and not germinate in dirt, they'll all roll off to the side. So on the side you'll have a dense planting of weeds. Let me show you what I've found. A present left from the previous owners. Look at this landscape fabric. What am I calling it? Oh yeah, weed anchor. It's a dense plastic with no holes in it. Wait, is that a pig? So this plastic is obviously used to keep things within bags, right? So there'll be no exchange of nutrients in the soil. See, look at the soil below this weed fabric. It just looks like dry sand. So anyway, when you come to your senses and actually want it removed, it's such a terrible job. It's heavy with dirt and anchored to the ground. Weed anchor. These are some alternatives that I recommend. You can use mulch. This is pea straw. If you want it to last a lot longer, you can use bark. The thicker pieces, the better. And the best thing about mulch is that it stops the weeds but also breaks down and improves your soil over time. Or you can just occasionally rip the weeds out and then throw them into the compost or feed them to your mates. Or you can use the chop and drop method. I call it the rip and dip, which means just taking out the weeds and dropping them where they were growing. And that means that the nutrients that they stole from the soil will just decompose and go right back in. It's a little tomato plant growing in a crack. Can't take that one out. See, it's not a weed to me. Come to think of it, what is a weed? I guess it's just a plant you don't want. Here's another option, and it comes in mat form. This is jute matting. It's made from the jute plant, so it's just organic matter that'll break down over time. So when the time comes where weeds eventually spread and start growing on top of this fabric, just like with the plastic stuff, well, you don't really have to remove it. It just removes itself. There are many different organic mat options. I've seen wool, and hemp. And a byproduct of this matting breaking down is adding nutrients to the soil instead of microplastics with the weed anchor fabric. But by far the easiest way to control weeds is to just let them grow and say who cares.